back. We've got to get Ben back. We are right buttons click and ran more steps this morning than he has in the last week, I would say. So I think we're all set for it, and I appreciate everybody a little patience if you've seen me and him running around back and forth. This morning, I wanted to talk a little bit about the hymn that we sang just a moment ago. Those of you that have been here the whole time, you'll remember, or maybe you know, that about 3 years ago, we started preaching hymn sermons in which we talked about various songs. This morning is one, and we're actually going to, this is, I think, the 25th one, so it's not been every month, but it's probably been 2 out of every 3 months here or there that we've had it. And they were sermons centered around specific hymns. The reason why is probably a verse that you're familiar with, but in Colossians chapter 3 and verse 16, it says that we are to teach and admonish each other, right? And it says that we're to do it in songs, and it goes on to say later that we're to do it with grace in our hearts to the Lord. The song that we sang just before is one we're going to talk about today, and that third verse is different in some ones, but actually kind of like the third verse for this morning, that's why I picked it, is the abundance of kind words that it mentions right there. But the song that we're talking about, it kind of depends on what hymn book you are singing from. This is one of those, is the glass half empty or half full kind of things. Some books, it's called Angry Words, and in other books, it's called Love One Another. And I think it just depends on whoever wrote the title was either not real happy or was real happy, one or the other, I guess, depending on how you wanted to look at it. But obviously, it gives us some good advice on how to deal in our interactions with one another, of course. And it also talks about how they can disrupt relationships. It can disrupt friendships, and it can disrupt a relationship with God as well. So I'm guessing that you're sitting there in your seat right now, and you're thinking, well, I already know what this lesson's about. You might be thinking, I don't ever say anything mean to anyone. You might even be thinking, this will be for all those other people that need to be more kind like me. So I'm going to talk about something different when it comes to angry words this morning. We're going to talk about angry words, and I'm going to pose this question. What does your presence on social media look like? Now, I look around this room, and I think a lot of you have a social media presence. Even old Nan does. Mary's exact statement to old Nan was she wasn't supposed to post anything. She could like things, but not post. But I'm sure most of you are familiar and maybe have multiples of each of those little logos that are popped up right there. There's Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. There's TikTok, and there's all sorts of other things. YouTube, there's all sorts of others that are on there as well. Snapchat, LinkedIn, Spotify, all sorts of these different examples that we have right there. And so I want to pose the question, what do we like? What do we share? What do we retweet? And how would we compare what we say online to what we say in person? Proverbs chapter 1 says, death and life are in the power of the tongue. And I would almost venture to say that that has been a very accurate statement up until about the last 20 years. And I think in the last 20 years, what we would call the social media age, it might have went from the tongue to the fingers. Bear with me for a second. I would dare say that our written word has a far greater presence than our spoken word today. Because most of the things that we say are in company of a small amount of people. It might be at work, or it might be in church. But those things that we post online not only are said, but can be shared and can be seen by people all around the globe. About 10 minutes ago, I got a text from somebody in Greece. It's a friend of mine who's on her honeymoon, and she'd ask a question. I think she got her times mixed up just a little bit. But I responded back. And that's halfway around the world, right? See how quick that can go? Now, what if she had said this morning, I need to ask Daniel a question. So I'm going to wait till the honeymoon ends, and I'll fly back, and I'll ask him then, and he'll ask me in person. Take a long time, right? But we can get information all around the world extremely quick. So the question that I'm going to ask then, are these words that we present, are these words that we post, are these words that we type out, and are these words that we hit send on honorable for a Christian? Look at Matthew chapter 12 and verse 36. Jesus said, but I say to you that for every idle word men may speak, they will give an account of it in the day of the judgment. Think about that for just a second. And I want you to think in particular about the word idle right there. I-D-L-E. We know what it means when our vehicle is idling, right? You might see it pop up last night. I saw that there were 2 teams in the top 10 that were idle this week. They weren't playing. They didn't have a game. We see the word idle right here. How many words do we say that aren't specific to an actual topic? You know, I might call you and say, I need you to pick me up at 7 o'clock so we can go to work. That's not an idle statement. We're trying to accomplish something there. Or I might call you and say, when you come over this evening, can you bring me a loaf of bread? That's not an idle statement. That's a request as well. But a lot of our language is idle. A lot of our language is just talking to be talking. Well, if it's just me and you riding down the road on our way to here or there, it's just me and you. But a lot of that idle language has moved from the private to the public sphere. A lot of that idle language is now present in conversations that we have that can be seen by literally any person with access to the internet. Right now, that's probably about 2/3 or 3/4 of the world's population. Jesus said, every idle word we speak, we'll have to give an account for in the day of judgment. That should be a scary thought for us when we think about the words that we say. We should then think very carefully about our angry words. I want to talk about a few things with regards to this morning. First of all, you'll see that the title up here for this first one, we see it as words as weapons. And words can be weapons. Tongues are powerful. Scripture reading that Jameson read just a second ago said the tongue has the power to control the entire body. It controls the whole body. Matthew chapter 12, verse 34 and 35, the verse before this one right here, we can see that it reflects, the tongue reflects the true expression of the inward man. That's when it really will come out if we're not careful. What our thoughts are, what we're saying right there. I'll present to you a question to start with. Have you ever seen someone post something on social media that you disagreed with? I'd imagine if you have a social media account, you have seen someone post something that you disagreed with. So then, maybe you make a comment. Some others jump in, make a comment. Almost like people are ready to pounce. Right? We're ready. We're right here. We're ready to jump. And before long, the comments start to veer off course just a little bit, right? And so it starts to get to, we're maybe down here to the 7th or 8th comment, and you're like, I'm not sure that person actually even read what was here at the start. And you can guarantee if it's an article, they didn't read it. But if they're right there, they're going to say, we're all of a sudden, we have veered completely off course. Now, We're not even talking about what was maybe even said. But we immediately assume the worst quite often when we respond. I'm not talking about the person that you know, the person that you work with, the person that lives down the street. I'm talking about you. You, the Christian, who said a minute ago that my tongue doesn't make anybody mad, but we do. Too often, we don't give anybody the benefit of the doubt. Too often, we don't ask the follow-up question that would help us to gain further information. If that person said that to you in person, you'd say, wait a minute, what do you mean by that right there? You would never say, well, you're an idiot. But it's like there's this online thing that allows us to do it without any concern. We immediately fire off these responses about how wrong they are, how dumb they are, or whatever else criticism you want to put in. Isn't this contradictory to the faith that we would profess? Doesn't it seem like that's contradictory? It seems like that some Christians seem to relish in perpetual disdain, suspicion, unkindness. Oh, it would be. It's almost as if we thrive on this. If you weren't a Christian, would that behavior make you want to become one? 15, verses 1 through 4, it starts with 3 or statements, O-R. What we say has the power of good or evil. In Proverbs chapter 15 and verse 1, it says we can turn away wrath, or we can stir up anger. So when it's or, you got 2 options, right? If I said, do you want vanilla ice cream or chocolate ice cream? You got to pick one of the 2, right? Turn away wrath or stir up anger. Proverbs 15 verse 2 says we can use knowledge, we can use knowledge wisely, or we can pour forth foolishness. Proverbs 15 in verse 4 says we can be a tree of life, or we can be a breaker of spirits. I dare say that there's a whole lot of Christians in the world that pick the second choice a whole lot of the time. There's a whole lot of people in the Christian world that love to stir up anger, that love to pour forth foolishness. I'd say that also love to be a breaker of spirits, and I don't see that that's the way a Christian should operate at all. Words can be weapons. I present to you this morning that in most everything in life, but especially the topic that we're looking at this morning, that there is wisdom in restraint. Book of Proverbs, which we were just reading from just a second ago, was written 2,000-3,000 years ago. So it's been around for a while, but it has principles today that work, or principles that worked then, and they work just as well today. I want to look at 2 to start with. In Proverbs chapter 12 and verse 18, we read this: there is one who speaks like the piercings of a sword, but the tongue of the wise promotes health. Think about that for a second. The way that we speak can be as a sword that pierces, that cuts, right? We can strive to sort of cut you down, or we can promote health. There's never been a doctor on a battlefield back in the day when they used swords and said, you know what? If you cut that sword real hard right across the body, your health will be good after that, right? That doesn't make sense. The sword was never meant to make people healthy. The sword was meant to eliminate enemies. If we are using the sword in what we say online, we are eliminating enemies in theory. We're not promoting health. We are not promoting positive health for it. A few chapters later, Proverbs chapter 17 and verse 27, we read, he who has knowledge spares his words, and a man of understanding is a calm Spirit. Think about that for a second. Sometimes we want to say all the stuff that we know. Let me rephrase. Sometimes we want to say all the stuff that we think that we know. Let me jump in here and say all of this, right? Proverbs 17:27 says, a wise man says, you know what? I'm going to hold back on this just a little bit. That's my words rephrasing. Sometimes in this eagerness to speak, we present what I dare say is a complete lack of wisdom. How many times have we said something, seen something, said something, shared something, made a big deal out of it, got the blood pressure real high, and then a little bit later, it's, oh, that wasn't true. That circled a lap around the world about a month ago, I think. People started sharing stuff, saying stuff, wasn't even true. Yeah, it was. So-and-so said it, and I believe them, or that. Relax, right? A little bit of wisdom and restraint. Think about, have you ever seen this online? Anger, malice, slander, jealousy, gossip, division, contempt, violence, judgment, condemnation. You ever seen that? You ever done it? Probably so. See quite a bit. Often, we are the purveyors of that as Christians. Let's talk for a second about some advantages of restraint. Proverbs chapter 10 and verse 19 says that it helps us to avoid sin. How many of you have ever in your life been about to do something really wrong? And you said, well, let me think about this for a second. When your kid was being raised, when your kid was growing up, one of the things that you told them was you said, think before you speak, right? Think before you act. As somebody who has taught school for 21 years, I have seen a whole lot of acting before thinking. I'm just going to be honest with you. And I've seen that kid then come to me and say, I got suspended for tomorrow. What work can I do? It's like, oh, you acted before you thought. Okay? Well, we say that to little kids and we say, be kind to your little brother or sister. Be kind to the girl that sits beside you in class. Think before you say it. But it's almost then, it's like we get older and we're like, nope, I'm going to act. I might think later. Proverbs 10 and 19 says, advantage of restraint says it would help us avoid sin. A few chapters later, Proverbs 21 and verse 23, we read that it helps keep our soul from troubles. A little bit of restraint keeps us from troubles. You can probably relate to that along the way as well. Uncontrolled tongues, poorly, or maybe as the song said, rashly stirred words, can destroy friendships and can make enemies. Think about that for a second. Can destroy friendships and can make enemies. The things that we might say, the things that we might post online can make somebody that we maybe have known for 40 years move away from us. No longer be friends. And something that we might have just said without thinking a second ago. Psalms chapter 55, Psalm 55, verse 12 through 14, we read, for it is not an enemy who reproaches me, then I could bear it. Nor is it one who hates me, who has exalted himself against me. Then I could hide from him. But it was you, a man of my equal, I would use the word friend for our sake today, my companion, my acquaintance. We took sweet counsel together and walked to the house of God in the throne. What it's saying right there is that you, my fellow Christian, my friend, my person that, use a word for today, that I sat in the pew with at church, angry words have split us apart. I dare say, without knowing specific examples, you probably do, that there are people in churches this morning that hate each other. Now, I'll sit over here and they'll sit over there because I'm going to go, but I don't like that person at all. Do you think that probably happens? Be hard-pressed to think that it wouldn't, right? And quite often, it's probably fair to say that it happened because of something somebody said. Maybe a lack of restraint in what was said there as well. We make statements online that we would never make to somebody in their face. Well, I think it's okay because I don't know that person. I don't know that person. I've never seen this person. So that means it's okay. Well, I might not know them, but if I'm a Christian, shouldn't my goal be to bring others to Christ? Now, Don talked a little bit about this morning, and it might not necessarily be the first thing we do with somebody. There's got to be a little bit of feeling out. But if the first thing that you say to somebody who you don't even know and you have never met online is something critical or hateful or mean, what's your next thing going to be? Because you've probably made it really hard to get a second line in there, at least an effective second line in there. If we can't show restraint, how you win souls? Our words are never neutral. But those examples I gave you a minute ago, malice, slander, jealousy, gossip, division, whatever it might be, compare them to these words. And I want you to give me an honest assessment of your social media page. Think about the ones I gave you a minute ago and think about these words now. Encouragement, hope, love, peace, unity, instruction, wisdom. Which one do you see more of? Set one, take something from Proverbs 15. The bad ones or the good ones? I seem to see a lot more of the bad ones. Let's talk about truth and grace for just a moment. To take back with what Don was talking about just a few moments ago in class, you might be saying, well, that's all true, but isn't it my job to point out the truth? Don said in class, and he said it well, he said there's a fine line that we have to walk. We walk a lot of fine lines in life. I think we know what a fine line is. You ever been to the state fair or the circus? You've seen those people walk on those tight ropes, right? And one slight move this way or that way, and they could fall right off. That's a definition of a fine line. And I will readily admit that we do have to point out the truth. But we're talking about social media Christianity today. And a lot of our social media arguments are grounded not in truth, but in things like hearsay,